pick that filthy rag off my floor.
Trevor Kessler sneered, his fingers flicking out like he was brushing away ash. He didn't even look at the older black man in gray coveralls standing before him. Instead, Trevor adjusted his pristine $1,100 white gi, basking in his own reflection against the trophy glass. Between them lay an old, frayed black belt, faded to a soft gray-white down the center from 40 years of blood, sweat, and a dying master's promise.
Look how diligently our little janitor handles garbage.
Trevor yelled, making sure his rich friends in the corridor heard every word. Laughter exploded around them.
A janitor thinks he's a black belt? Come on, tough guy, show us a move. Or do you only know how to clean up after real champions? People like you carry a stench from the gutter. You don't belong here. Go back to the basement where you belong.
With an ugly grin, Trevor snatched the sacred belt and tossed it into the open trash can, right over wet coffee grounds.
Throw this pathetic rag out with the rest of the trash.
Elias Broadus remained deathly still. His forearms of iron didn't shake. His clear, unbreakable temper held tight. He simply bent from the knees, lifting his master's promise out of the filth with both hands. Trevor laughed and walked away. He had absolutely no idea that the silent man holding that mop was a 6th degree Grandmaster. And in exactly 6 weeks, this entire gleaming temple would crumble to its knees at his feet. But before that temple fell, you have to understand who was holding that mop. And you have to understand exactly how a place that beautiful had learned to look straight through a man and see nothing at all. His name was Elias Broadus. Everyone at the Vaughn Institute called him Eli. When they called him anything. Most nights, they didn't. He was 54 years old. He came in at 9 at night. When the last class had gone home and the last luxury sedan had pulled out of the private garage, and he left at 4 in the morning, when the sky over Lake Michigan was still the color of wet slate. In between, he was the reason the Vaughn Institute of Martial Excellence looked every single dawn. Like a temple, he mopped the competition mats on his hands and knees, section by section. Because a machine leaves streaks, and streaks catch the eye of a man like Preston Vaughn. He wiped down the 42 trophies in the front cases with a soft cloth and a solution he mixed himself. Because the supply the Institute ordered left a film, he emptied the trash. He scrubbed the locker rooms. He fixed the boiler in February, when the boiler was the only thing between 200 rich students and a very cold morning. And no one thanked him for the boiler either, because no one knew there had ever been a problem. That was the whole art of Eli's job. If he did it perfectly, it looked like magic. If it looked like magic, no one thought about the man. The Vaughn Institute sat on the ground floor of a limestone building in the Gold Coast, the richest stretch of the richest neighborhood in Chicago, where a monthly membership cost more than most families in this city spend on rent. The floors were blonde maple. The walls were hung with framed photographs of Preston Vaughn shaking hands with people whose faces meant nothing to Eli and everything to the members. There was a brand new wing at the back, all glass and steel, with a sign over the arch that read, in brushed gold letters, "The Kessler, Champions Wing." Eli cleaned that wing. 2. He lived 11 miles and one entire world south of it, in a third-floor apartment in Bronzeville, above a shuttered record store. In a building his grandmother would have called honest and a developer would have called a teardown. 1 room, a narrow bed, a hot plate, a window that faced east. So the sun came in, first thing, and along one wall, on a shelf, he had built himself out of scrap pine, sat the only things Elias Broadus owned that he would have run into a fire to save. A photograph of a man in white, standing on a beach in Okinawa, squinting into the sun, a folded American flag in a triangle of glass, and a black belt, frayed to gray-white at the center, folded inside a wooden box. His hands had oiled so many times the grain had gone dark. To understand the belt, you have to go back 40 years. To a 19-year-old Marine, Elias Broadus enlisted at 18. Because Bronzeville in the early 1980s did not offer a boy like him a longer list of doors, and the Marine Corps offered exactly one, and he took it. They stationed him at Kadena, on Okinawa, and on a Tuesday evening in his second month, homesick and looking for something to fill the hours, he wandered off base and down a narrow street until he heard a sound he did not have a word for yet. The sharp, rhythmic snap of a dozen bodies moving as one, and a single old voice counting them through it. The dojo had no sign. It had a dirt floor, packed hard as concrete, a low ceiling, and a master named Kaito Uhara. Hanshi Uehara was in his 60s then. He had learned his karate on this same island before the war, and he had survived the war. And he had learned something in surviving it that he spent the rest of his life trying to hand to other people without words. Because he did not believe the most important things could be said out loud. He taught for free. He took students no one else would take. The poor, the angry, the broken, the ones the fancy tournament schools across the water would never let through the door. He looked up at the tall young black American standing in his doorway, soaked in sweat from the walk, and he did not see a Marine, or a foreigner, or a color. He saw a boy with something heavy inside him that had nowhere to go. He crooked one finger. Eli trained under Uhara for 3 years. Not the flashy karate you see in movies. No spinning kicks. No shouting for the camera. Goju-ryu. Hard and soft. The style that teaches you to receive a strike the way water receives a stone. To redirect a mountain instead of meeting it. Uhara worked him until Eli's forearms turned to iron and his temper turned to glass. Clear. Still. Unbreakable. And on the night before Eli's unit shipped home, the old man called him to the front of the dojo, in front of every student, and tied a black belt around his waist with his own hands. Shodan, Uhara said. First step. Beginner. Now, you truly begin. That was 1989. Over the next 30 years, wherever the Corps sent him, and wherever life sent him after, Eli found a floor and kept training. He went back to Okinawa 4 times, on his own dime, to test a nubbling. Nidan, Sandan, Yodan, Godan, and on the last visit, the one where Uhara was already sick and thin and could no longer stand for a full class, the old man tested him for 6th degree, Rokudan, and passed him. And then he did something Eli did not expect. He took off his own belt, the one he had worn for 50 years, the one frayed to gray-white at the center from half a century of a great man's hands. He folded it and pressed it into Eli's arms with both hands. A belt is not a rank. Uhara said, a belt is a promise. Mine is finished. Yours is not. Carry both. Kaito Uhara died. 3 months later, Eli flew back for the funeral and stood at the edge of the mourners in a country where he had once been a stranger and was now family. And he carried the belt home to Chicago in his lap on the plane, in a plastic bag, the most valuable object he would ever own. He never wore it. You do not wear another man's promise around your own waist. He kept it in the box, and every night, before he clocked in at the Vaughn Institute of Martial Excellence. Every single night for the 6 years he had worked there. Elias Brodus opened that box, laid 2 fingers flat against the worn center of that belt, and made the same silent vow he had made at a funeral in Okinawa. The promise does not die with the man. I will pass it on. I will find the one who needs it, and I will pass it on. Then he closed the box, put on his gray coveralls, and went to mop the floors of a temple that did not know it, had a grandmaster cleaning its toilets. There were 2 people at the Vaughn Institute who saw Eli. Only 2. The first was a 15-year-old boy named Deshaun Ellis. Deshaun was the only scholarship student in the entire building. His mother worked 2 jobs and had filled out the application to the Vaughn Youth Excellence Fund with her own hands at the kitchen table at midnight. And against every odd, Deshaun had gotten in. Not because Preston Vaughn cared about a boy from the South Side, but because the Vaughn Youth Excellence Fund made for an excellent line in a fundraising letter and an excellent photograph on the website. Deshaun had talent. Real talent. The kind you cannot buy. The kind that comes from a body that has already learned how to move through a hard world. But he wore the same GI 3 sizes too big that the fund had provided, and he took 2 buses and a train to get there. And the sons and daughters of the members treated him the way the members treated Eli, because they had learned it from the same place. Trevor Kessler treated Deshaun. Worst of all, the second person who saw Eli was Miss Odessa Grant, who had run the Vaughn Institute's front desk for 20 years, since before it was fancy. Since when Preston Vaughn was a broke 26-year-old with 1 rented room and a dream and a knack for making rich people feel special. Ms. Odessa was 63, sharp as a fillet knife, and black, and from the South Side, and she had watched Preston get rich, and get famous, and get cold. All in that order. She stayed because the pension was good, and because somebody in that building needed to remember when it had a soul. Ms. Odessa gave Eli a cup of coffee every night when he came in. Real coffee. From the machine in the office. In a real mug. Not the paper cups the staff were supposed to use. She left it on the corner of her desk without a word, and he took it without a word. And every night he brought the mug back washed. It was the only warm human exchange Eli had inside those walls, and it lasted about 4 seconds. And it was everything. One night, in Eli's first winter there, Ms. Odessa had watched him through the office window as he crossed the empty competition mat with his mop bucket. She saw him stop. She saw him set the bucket down, and she saw him stand at the edge of the mat, alone, in the dark, and bow to it. A slow, formal, exact bow from the waist, the way the students bowed when they entered. Except none of the students bowed like that. With that stillness, with that weight. Ms. Odessa Grant had grown up in a church where the deacons carried themselves a certain way, where old men who had seen everything moved through the world with a dignity the world had never once handed them for free. She knew that bow. She did not know what it meant exactly, but she knew it was not the bow of a man who mops floors. She never asked him about it. Some things you do not ask. You just watch, and you file it away, and you wait. Deshaun found out about Eli by accident, on a Thursday in October. 6 weeks before the night this whole story turns, he had stayed late. He always stayed late, because the last train ran late, and there was no point going home to an empty apartment. And because if he stayed late, he could get 20 extra minutes on the heavy bag when no instructor was around to tell him he was doing it wrong in front of the members. He was working a combination. The same combination Trevor had mocked him for that afternoon in front of the whole intermediate class. And he was doing it wrong. And he knew he was doing it wrong. and he could not figure out why, and his eyes were hot, with a 15-year-old's fury that a 15-year-old is too proud to let fall. "Your feet," a voice said quietly from behind him. Deshaun spun around. The janitor was standing there with his mop, not looking directly at him, the way a man doesn't look directly at a wounded animal. "You're punching with your arm," Eli said. "The power's in the ground. You want to hit him back. Put your feet in the floor first. Turn from the hip. The hand is last. The hand is always last." Deshaun stared at him. "What do you know about it?" Eli looked at the bag for a moment. Then he set his mop against the wall, walked over, and, without touching the boy, without raising his voice, without a single wasted motion, he showed him one step, one turn, one strike into the heavy bag that Deshaun felt in the soles of his own feet, 3 yards away. A sound like a car door slamming. A sound the bag had never made for Trevor Kessler in his life. The chain holding the bag to the ceiling snapped, taut, and rang. Eli picked his mop back up. "Feet first," he said. "Try it." Deshaun tried it. He got it wrong. He tried it again. He got it less wrong. Eli watched, and nodded once, and went back to his mopping. And that was the beginning. After that, 3 or 4 nights a week, Deshaun stayed late and the janitor taught him. Never on the record, never where anyone could see. Just 20 minutes here, 10 minutes there. A correction murmured across the empty mat. A principal handed over so quietly, the boy sometimes didn't realize he'd been given something until he woke up the next morning knowing it. Eli never told Deshaun who he was. Deshaun never asked, but the boy who had come in wearing a gi 3 sizes too big started to move like a boy who knew a secret. And by that October he was Wayno. Quietly, without anyone in that building noticing. The best young fighter the Vaughn Institute had, taught by a man they paid to clean the mats. There was one more thing about Elias Broadus that no one in the Gold Coast knew. 4 nights a week, in the basement of Greater Canaan Missionary Baptist Church, back home in Bronzeville, on a mat he had bought with his own money and hauled down the stairs himself, Elias Broadus ran a karate class for kids. Free. He'd been doing it for 11 years. No trophy. No cameras. No scholarship fund letters. Just 15 or 20 children from the neighborhood. Some of them the same age his little brother Andre had been, because that was the other thing. The thing underneath everything. The reason a man with a grandmaster's hands chose to spend his nights invisible, Andre Broadus, had been Eli's little brother, 19 years old. Funny. Faster than Eli had ever been. The one everybody said was going to be somebody. Andre had been standing on a corner 4 blocks from their mother's apartment in 1996. Not doing anything. Just standing. Just being young and black on a summer evening. When a car came through and the shooting started, and Andre Broadus was gone before he hit the ground. Not the target. Never the target. Just a boy. In the wrong 3 seconds. Eli was overseas when it happened. He got the call at Cadena. He flew home and buried his baby brother. And he did not go back to the tournament circuit he'd been quietly dominating. Did not chase the sponsorships and the trophies and the name. Because standing over that casket he understood something with the same cold clarity Uhara had tried to teach him. The point of all this strength was never the trophy. The point was the kids. The point was to catch them before the corner did. To put something in them. Discipline. Stillness. The knowledge of their own power. That would keep them standing when the world came through fast. So he cleaned rich people's floors for a paycheck. And he taught poor people's children for free. And he carried a dead master's belt in a wooden box. And he waited for the one who would need it. And he was, by any measure that has ever mattered, the most important man in the entire Vaughn Institute of Martial Excellence. He was also, to everyone but a teenager and an old woman, completely invisible. That was about to change. You cannot understand what happened without understanding Preston Vaughn. Because cruelty in a place like this always starts at the top and rolls downhill. And Preston Vaughn was at the top. He was 46. He had built the Institute from nothing, and he had never let anyone forget it. He'd been a genuinely talented point fighter in his 20s. Fast hands, faster feet. A nationally ranked competitor in the circuit where you score points by touching your opponent first and dancing away. But point fighting is a sport, and Preston had mistaken the sport for the art. And somewhere in his 30s, as the trophies stacked up and the money came in, and the television people started returning his calls, he had stopped being a martial artist and started being a brand. He called himself Kiyoshi now, a real title. In the real world, that a real governing body confers on a master after decades of service and testing, Preston had given it to himself. He had a streaming show called The Vaughn Way. 41,000 subscribers and climbing. He had a book, ghostwritten. He wore a gi that cost $1,100 and a black belt with 7 embroidered gold bars on it that no legitimate federation had ever awarded him. And he moved through his gleaming temple like a man who believed the gleam was the point. And Preston Vaughn wanted 3 things more than he wanted air. He wanted the streaming deal. A production company called Meridian had been circling for months, dangling a series, Champions Academy, a competition reality show built around the Institute and its fighters, the kind of show that turns a local business into a national franchise and a rich man into a very rich man. The producer, a woman named Sloane Carrington, had made it clear the deal was close. Close, but not signed. He wanted the money. The Kessler Champions wing had been paid for by Roland Kessler, a developer who had made a fortune buying up buildings in neighborhoods like the one Eli lived in and turning them into buildings for people like the ones Eli cleaned up after. Roland's son, Trevor, was the Institute's star, and Roland's checkbook was the Institute's foundation. And Preston Vaughn spent a great deal of energy making sure Roland Kessler felt like a king inside those walls. And more than the deal, more than the money, Preston Vaughn wanted the one thing his own self-awarded titles could never give him. He wanted to be real, because there was a governing body, an actual, 100-year-old international federation, that traced its lineage straight back to Okinawa, straight back through the generations of masters to the source. The Seiyukai, certification by the Seiyukai, was the only thing in the entire martial world that Preston Vaughn's money could not simply buy. It required a lineage. It required legitimacy. It required a grandmaster of the Federation to come in person, to examine your school, to watch your instruction, and to decide whether your gleaming temple was a house of the art or just a very expensive gym with good lighting. Preston had been petitioning the Seiyukai for 3 years. 3 years of letters, of applications, of donations to their scholarship funds. And 6 weeks before the night this story turns, he had finally gotten his answer. The Seiyukai was sending someone, the head of the Federation itself, Hanshi Isamutoyama, 72 years old, one of the last living men to have trained directly under the old Okinawan masters, was coming to Chicago. He would preside over a certification ceremony and a demonstration tournament. He would watch, and he would decide whether to grant the Vaughn Institute of Martial Excellence official affiliation with the true lineage. Meridian had agreed to film it. The certification and the streaming deal, in Preston's mind, were now the same event. The night the Vaughn Institute became legend, broadcast to the world. Everything had to be perfect. And in Preston Vaughn's understanding of the word perfect, there was no room for the man who cleaned his floors. There is a kind of cruelty that does not need a fist. It only needs an audience, a set of rules, and a man at the top who has decided that some people are furniture. It started on a Monday. 6 weeks out, Preston called an all-staff meeting for 2 in the afternoon. Instructors, front desk, support staff, everyone. He stood at the front of the main mat in his $1,100 gi with his hands on his hips and laid out the plan for the certification. The tournament, the ceremony, the cameras, the most important 6 weeks in the history of the Institute. Then he got to what he called presentation standards. When Hanshi Toyama is in this building, Preston said, everything he sees represents me. Everything. So let me be clear about the environment we're creating. He turned, and his eyes swept past the instructors, past Mrs. Odessa at the back, and landed on Eli, who stood near the wall in his gray coveralls with his hands folded in front of him. Support staff, Preston said, will not be visible during operating hours for the duration of the certification period. I don't want mops in the corner of a camera shot. I don't want a member walking past a trash cart. Service entrance only. Service corridor only. You come in when we're closed. And you're gone before we open. He paused. And he smiled. And the smile was the worst part. Hanshi Toyama is coming to see a house of excellence. He is not coming to see the help. A couple of the younger instructors laughed under their breath. Trevor Kessler, leaning against the trophy case with his arms crossed, looked directly at Eli and let his smile spread slow and wide. Ms. Odessa Grant looked at the floor. Eli said nothing. He kept his hands folded and his eyes level and his face perfectly, terribly still. And if you did not know how to read stillness, you would have thought there was nothing behind it at all. There was everything behind it. But Eli had learned, from a man who survived a war, that the strongest thing you can do with a room full of people who have decided you are nothing is to deny them the reaction they came for. So he denied them. He nodded once, slowly, and that was all. Wednesday made it worse. Eli had ducked into the small break room the staff used in the 4 minutes he had for a meal, and he was sitting with a sandwich when Trevor Kessler came in with 2 of his friends. Trevor stopped in the doorway, looked at Eli sitting there, looked at the sandwich, and made a show of wrinkling his nose. "Do you smell that?" Trevor said to his friends. Loud. "For the room. Something in here." He fanned his hand in front of his face. "Some people just carry a smell with them. You can't help where you come from. I guess." He looked right at Eli. "You eat in here again. Altman. And I'm telling my father the staff facilities need to be relocated. You get me. Basement's fine for people like you." Eli set the sandwich down. He did not answer. He folded the rest into a napkin, stood, gathered his things, and walked out past the boy. And Trevor said to his back, loud enough for the corridor to hear, "Boy had the nerve to look at me." You see, that boy actually looked me in the eye. By Thursday, there was a printed notice on the staff board. Effective, immediately, per management. Support staff meals will be taken off-site or in the lower-level storage area. The break room is reserved for instructional and front-of-house personnel. Signed, P. Vaughn. The lower-level storage area had no window and no chair. It smelled of cleaning chemicals and old rubber matting. Eli carried a folding chair down from the supply closet and set it beside the shelving. And he ate his dinner there. Alone. 11 miles from home, in the basement of a temple. And he thought about Hanshi Ohara's dirt floor dojo, where the poorest man in the city was welcomed with a crooked finger. And he understood, not for the first time. exactly how far the art he loved could travel from itself, while calling itself by the same name. Friday, they filmed the promotional segment. Sloan Carrington's Meridian crew was in for the day, shooting footage for the streaming deal, and Preston wanted a shot of the trophy wall gleaming. Eli was called in early, the one time all week he was allowed on the floor during daylight, to polish the cases while the light was right. He worked quietly at the edge of the frame while the camera set up, and Trevor Kessler, who had figured out that a camera was rolling, decided to make content. He walked over to where Eli was working, pulled out his phone, and started recording, angling it so he had Eli in the background. On his knees, cloth in hand. "Yo, check it," Trevor said into his phone, grinning. "This is our janitor. Watch this. Hey, old man." He raised his voice. "You know any karate, huh? You want to try me? Come on. Show us a move. Show us a move." Tough guy. He threw a lazy, mocking front kick in Eli's direction, stopping it a foot short, and laughed. "Nah, he's good. He knows his place." "Right, you know your place." He turned the phone to his own grinning face. "Man's been mopping floors his whole life. Some people got it," he flexed. "And some people clean up after the people who got it. Hashtag Vaughn Way. Champions only." He posted it. Eli kept polishing the glass. His hands did not shake. His breath did not change. In the reflection of the trophy case, he watched the boy walk away laughing. And he thought about a 19-year-old on a beach in Okinawa. And he thought about his little brother. And he thought, with the vast, patient stillness of a man who has already survived, the worst thing that will ever happen to him. You do not know who you are speaking to, and that is not your sin. Your sin is that you would speak to anyone this way. And then came Thursday of the second week. The belt. It happened because of a set of keys. Trevor had lost his gym locker key. An expensive, custom brass thing his father had bought as part of the Founder's Circle package. And rather than report it to Ms. Odessa like a person, he decided the janitor had it. The logic was simple, and it was the logic of the whole building. The janitor handles things. The janitor is around things. If a thing is missing, the janitor is the natural suspect. Trevor did not have a shred of evidence. He did not need one. He found Eli in the service corridor near the supply closet, restocking towels. And he did not ask. He accused, "Where's my key?" Eli straightened. "I don't have your key." "Sir, don't lie to me. You clean the lockers. You're in there every night. Where is it?" "I don't touch the members' lockers," Eli said, evenly. "I clean the room. I don't open the lockers. If you've lost it, Ms. Grant keeps the..." "I'm not talking to Ms. Grant. I'm talking to you." Trevor stepped closer, and there was something ugly and delighted rising in his face. Because a member had gathered. 2, then 3. And Trevor Kessler was never crueler than when he had a crowd. "Empty your cart. Come on, empty it. Let's see what you've been walking out of here with." Eli looked at him for a long moment. Then, because a 54-year-old black man in this country does not argue with a rich young white man's accusation in front of an audience. Because Eli had learned, in a harder school than any dojo, exactly how those scenes end. He stepped back and let the boy do it himself. Trevor tore into the cart. He threw towels on the floor. He pulled out cleaning bottles, a bag of rags, and he dumped the whole thing across the corridor tile. And he found no key. because there was no key. But he found something else. Eli had brought the box that night. He had not meant to leave it in the cart. He had meant to keep it in his own locker. As always. But the schedule had been chaos all week, and he had set it in the cart while he moved supplies. And there it was, a worn wooden box. Trevor pulled it out, and opened it, and lifted out the belt. "What is this?" Trevor held it up between two fingers, dangling it, the way you hold something you found in a gutter. It unfurled, long, frayed, gray-white down the center, soft with age. "This is disgusting. Is this? What? Is this yours?" He laughed. "Is this what you wear? You a black belt, old man?" The word came out of him drenched in mockery. He looked at his friends. "The janitor thinks he's a black belt. Look at this thing. It's a rag. It smells." He wadded it in his fist. "You keep garbage like this in your little box like it's treasure. This is..." He searched for the word he wanted. The word that would land. "This is pathetic." And then he did the thing. He turned, and he tossed the belt. Hanshi Kaito Ehara's belt. 50 years of a great master's hands. A promise carried across an ocean and held in a wooden box for 6 years. Into the open trash can at the end of the corridor. It landed on coffee grounds and paper towels. "Throw it out with the rest of the trash," Trevor said, "and find my key." He walked away. His friends walked away laughing. The corridor was empty. Elias Broadus stood very still for the space of 3 breaths. And in those 3 breaths, everything that Kaito Ehara had spent 3 years pouring into a homesick Marine held. The iron forearms held. The glass temper held. Clear. Still. Unbreakable. A lesser man's rage would have been a fire. And fires can be seen. And fires can be used against you. And fires burn out. Eli's was not a fire. It was the deep cold of the lake in February. The kind that does not roar. The kind that simply, patiently, waits. He walked to the trash can. He bent from the knees, and he lifted the belt out with both hands. Never one hand. Both. The way you lift something that outranks you. He brushed the coffee grounds off it. Gently, with his thumb, he folded it once against his chest. That is the moment the story began with. That is the moment Trevor called the belt a filthy rag, and said people like you carry a stench from the gutter, and threw a dying master's promise into the garbage. But there was something Trevor did not see, something none of them saw, because Hanshi Isamu Toyama had come early. He had come 3 days ahead of the ceremony. Alone, without announcement, in a plain black overcoat, because that is what real masters do. They come to a place unannounced, when it is not performing, to see what it actually is. He had walked in the front door of the Vaughn Institute of Martial Excellence expecting to find a school he would examine and probably certify, and instead he had found a young man in a black belt throwing an old man's belt into the garbage and calling it a rag. And he had recognized the belt. Of course he had recognized the belt. Isamu Toyama had trained under Kaito Uhara on the same island, in the same years, on the same dirt floor as the tall young American. He had knelt beside Elias Broadus 40 years ago. He had watched Uhara tie Eli's first belt, and, decades later, had heard that Uhara, dying, having passed over every senior Japanese student, every obvious heir, had given his own 50-year belt to the American who cleaned floors. Because Uehara had judged that the American understood the one thing that could not be taught, that the art was not property, that it was a debt, that you carried it not to own it, but to give it away. Toyama had not seen Eli in 20 years. He had not known Eli was in Chicago. He had walked into this gleaming temple by chance and found his old brother on his knees in a service corridor, brushing coffee grounds off their master's belt. While a laughing boy called it garbage, the old man did not say anything that day. He simply turned and walked back out into the Chicago cold. And something moved behind his eyes, something ancient and certain. He had come to decide whether to certify a school. He had already decided. He just had to choose the moment. They came in tuxedos and evening gowns to watch children fight. The night of the Seryukai certification and demonstration tournament, the Vaughn Institute of Martial Excellence was the most beautiful it had ever been. Every trophy gleaming, every mat spotless, every surface polished to a shine. All of it, the work of a man who was, per management directive, not permitted to be seen. 200 folding chairs in white had been arranged around the main competition mat. A dais at the front held a single ornate chair for the guest of honor. Meridian's cameras, 5 of them, ringed the room on tripods and jibs, and Sloane Carrington stood at the back in a headset, watching the monitors, ready to capture the night the Vaughn Institute became a national brand. Roland Kessler sat in the front row in a tuxedo, beaming, beside an empty seat reserved for the Hanshi. Preston Vaughn, in a fresh gi and his self-awarded 7-bar belt, moved among the guests like a groom at his own wedding. And Trevor Kessler, warming up in the wings, bounced on his toes and rolled his shoulders, because Trevor was the headliner. The final demonstration of the evening would be Trevor Kessler, the Institute's champion, showcasing the excellence that the great federation was here to certify. Deshaun Ellis was there too, in a chair at the very back, in his too big G, because scholarship students were required to attend such events for the photographs, but were not, of course, invited to demonstrate. He sat alone. He did not know that the janitor who taught him to punch was also in the building tonight. Almost no one did, because Preston had ordered Eli in, not to be seen, never to be seen, but because 200 people generate 200 people's worth of mess, and someone had to be standing by in the service corridor to keep the temple perfect while it was being immortalized. Eli was there in his gray coveralls, behind the wall, listening to the murmur of the crowd through the doorway, holding a folded towel, waiting to be invisible on the most important night in his employer's life. He had the belt with him. After the trash can, he had never once left it in his locker again. It rode in the inner pocket of his coveralls, folded flat, against his chest. He touched it through the fabric, once, and made his vow, silently, as he did every night. I will find the one who needs it, and I will pass it on. At 7 o'clock, the doors at the front opened, and Hanshi Isamu Toyama entered. He wore a simple white gi and a black belt, as worn as the one hidden against Eli's chest, and he moved into that gleaming room full of tuxedos, with a stillness that made the whole crowd fall quiet without being asked. Preston Vaughn rushed forward, bowing far too low, his face split with a smile, his hand already extended. Roland Kessler rose. The cameras swung to catch the great man's arrival. The historic handshake. The moment the Vaughn Institute joined the lineage, Hanshi Toyama walked straight past Preston Vaughn's outstretched hand. He did not shake it. He did not slow down. He walked past the beaming owner, past the developer in his tuxedo, past the front row, and the dais and the ornate chair set out for him, past the whole gleaming performance of the thing, and the crowd's murmur died to nothing, as 200 people watched the most important man in the room ignore the master of the house and walk toward the wall at the back of the mat, toward the plain doorway to the service corridor. where a 54-year-old man in gray coveralls stood holding a folded towel. Preston's smile froze on his face. Toyama stopped in front of Eli. For a moment, the two old men simply looked at each other across 40 years. And then Hanshi Isamu Toyama, head of the Seiryu-kai, one of the last living links to the old masters of Okinawa, the man this entire $200,000 evening had been built to impress, brought his feet together, placed his hands at his sides, and bowed. No danot, not the shallow social bow the members gave when they entered. A deep, formal, waist-folding bow, held long. The bow a student gives a senior. The bow you give to someone who outranks you. 200 people watched the Grandmaster bow to the janitor. The silence in that room was total. Eli returned the bow. Deeper. Longer. The bow. To one's elder. The two of them holding it in the hush, while 5 cameras rolled and not a single person in a tuxedo understood what they were seeing. Then Toyama straightened, and he spoke. And though his voice was quiet, the room was so silent that every word carried to the last white chair. Brodus. The old man's eyes were bright. Elias Brodus. 40 years. He shook his head slowly. I did not know you were here. I walk into this place 3 days ago to see what it is. And I find you. Something crossed his face. Grief and fury held behind that stillness. I find you on your knees in the back hall. And I find a boy throwing Ohara-sensei's belt into the garbage. A ripple went through the crowd. Preston Vaughn took a step forward. Hanshi, I think there's been... This is our custodian. He's not. Toyama turned his head, slowly, and looked at Preston Vaughn. And Preston Vaughn stopped talking. The old man turned back to Eli. He looked at the coveralls, at the towel in Eli's hand, and when he spoke again, he had raised his voice, deliberately, so that it filled the whole room, so that the cameras caught it, so that not one soul in that temple could pretend later that they had not heard. Do you know who this man is? Hanshi Toyama said to the room. Any of you. Do you know who you have had cleaning your floors? He gestured at Eli, and his hand was not steady. Because even a master feels some things. This is Elias Brodus, Rokudan, 6th degree black belt of the Seiryu-kai, direct student of Hanshi Kaito Ehara, of Okinawa, under whom I also trained, and to whom this man was senior. When our master was dying, he passed over every one of us, every Japanese student, every heir, and he gave his own belt, his 50-year belt, the belt he wore before most of you were born, to this man, because Uehara-sensei judged him worthy. Uehara-sensei judged Elias Brodus to understand the art more truly than anyone he had ever taught. He let that land. Then, more quietly, with a blade in it, I came to Chicago to decide whether to certify this school. And in this school, a boy threw that belt in the trash and called it garbage. And called this man garbage. And no one. His eyes moved across the front row. Across Preston. Across Roland Kessler. Across the instructors lining the wall. No one stopped him. For a moment, no one moved. 200 people in evening dress sat frozen. And 5 cameras rolled. And Preston Vaughn's face had gone the color of the plaster. And then Trevor Kessler laughed. He had come out of the wings during the silence, warmed up and confused and unwilling to believe that the night he was supposed to headline had just been hijacked by a janitor. He laughed the ugly, disbelieving laugh of a young man who has never once in his life not gotten his way. This is a joke, Trevor said, loudly, to the room, spreading his arms. This is, come on, him. He's the janitor. He mops the floors. I've seen him. He pointed at Eli. That guy couldn't throw a punch to save his life. I made a video. You can look it up. He's nobody. This is some kind of setup. He turned to the Hanshi, and in the arrogance of the moment, he made the mistake that would end him. Respectfully, Sir, you're being lied to. There's no way that man is a 6th degree anything. Let him prove it. Right now, let him spar me. Let's see it. The room drew a breath. Toyama looked at Trevor for a long moment. And then he looked at Eli. And there was a question in the old man's eyes. Eli understood it. You do not have to. This boy is not worth your hands. But if you choose to teach, I will let you teach. Eli set his towel down on the corner of the mat, folded neatly. The way he folded everything, he unzipped the gray coveralls and let them drop, and underneath he wore only a plain white t-shirt and loose black work pants. And he stepped out of his soft shoes and stood barefoot at the edge of the competition mat, where he had, on his knees in the dark, bowed to the emptiness 1,000 nights. He reached into the pocket of the coveralls and took out the belt. He did not put it on. You do not wear another man's promise around your own waist. Instead, he walked to Hanshi Toyama and, with both hands, offered it to him. The old man took it and understood and held it against his own chest, holding it for his brother, the way you hold a thing that matters while the work is done. Eli walked to the center of the mat. He faced the boy, and he bowed to him. A full, correct, respectful bow to an opponent, because that is the first thing Uehara taught, and the last thing Trevor Kessler had ever learned. Trevor did not bow back. He grinned, bounced on his toes, threw a few flashy combinations into the air to loosen up, played to the crowd. Then he set his feet in the point fighter's stance, hands low, front foot light, ready to dart in, touch, and dance away for the point whenever you're ready. Old man, Trevor said. Eli stood almost motionless, feet apart, weight low, hands relaxed at his sides. Not a fighting stance. The crowd recognized. Just a man standing, rooted, still, sanchin. The stance Goju Ryu is built on. The stance that says, I am the ground. Come and move the ground. Trevor exploded forward. He was fast. Genuinely fast. The tournament speed his father had paid a fortune to cultivate. And he snapped a lead hand strike straight at Eli's face. The point-scoring blow. The one that had won him 100 trophies. Eli was not there. He had not jumped back. He had not blocked. He had shifted. A small turn from the hip. 6 inches. No more. And Trevor's strike passed through the air where Eli's head had been. And in the same motion, the same single flowing motion, Eli's forearm rolled the boy's arm off its line, redirected it, and Trevor's own speed carried him stumbling forward past the old man like a bull, past a matador. The crowd gasped. Trevor recovered, furious now, embarrassed, and came again. A real attack this time. A fast combination. Hands and a kick. No longer playing for points, but trying to hurt. And this is the thing that 200 people in tuxedos and 41,000 streaming subscribers and one very ambitious producer at the back of the room learned that night. All at once. Forever. There is a difference between a sport and an art, between touching and understanding, between a boy who has been taught to win and a man who has been taught to receive. Eli received him. Every strike Trevor threw met not a wall but water. Deflected. Redirected. Absorbed. Turned. Eli did not throw a single punch. He did not need to. He moved the way Uehara had moved on that dirt floor. The way the lake moves. Patient and total. And Trevor Kessler's furious. Expensive. Trophy-winning offense simply slid off him and past him and around him. Again and again. While the boy's breath grew ragged and his face grew red and the crowd's silence turned into something else. An awe. A dawning. A collective understanding of how badly they had all been fooled by a gleaming room. And then Trevor overreached. Lunged too far. Too angry. Off his route. And Eli finally moved forward. It was almost gentle. Eli stepped in. They closed the distance the boy had opened. Caught the overextend. Turned from the hip. Put his feet in the floor. The power is in the ground. The hand is always last. And with a motion so economical, it looked like nothing at all. He took Trevor Kessler off his feet and laid him down on the mat. Not slammed. Not hurt. Laid him down. Controlled all the way to the ground. The way you would set down something you did not wish to break. And knelt over him with one knee. One hand pinning the boy's shoulder to the polished maple. And held him there. The boy who had called an old man's belt garbage lay on his back on the competition mat. Pinned by the janitor. In front of 200 people and 5 cameras and his own father. And he could not move. Eli looked down at him. He was not breathing hard. His face was still. Clear. Still. Unbreakable. And there was no triumph in it. And no cruelty in it. And that absence was the most devastating thing of all. He held Trevor down for exactly as long as it took for the truth to arrive in the boy's eyes. And then Elias Broadus did the thing that Kaito Uehara had spent 3 years teaching him. The thing that separates the art from the sport. The master from the champion. The man from the boy. He stood up, and he offered Trevor Kessler his hand. Trevor stared at the hand. His eyes were wet. Every person in that room was watching. And after a long, terrible moment, the boy took it, and the old man pulled him gently to his feet. And, because Eli did not release the boy's hand, but held it, and looked at him, Trevor Kessler understood that he was being shown a mercy he had never once shown anyone. And something in the boy broke open. And he began, silently, to cry. Eli did not say, "I told you so." He did not say anything at all to Trevor. He simply released the boy's hand, stepped back, and bowed to him. The closing bow. Opponent to opponent. The respect he had been denied. Offered freely to the one who had denied it. Then he walked to Hanshi Toyama and took his master's belt back into his own 2 hands. And the old man's eyes were bright. And the room was utterly silent. And then Ms. Odessa Grant, at the back of the room, stood up from her chair, put her 2 hands together, and began to applaud. Deshaun Ellis was on his feet a half-second later, clapping so hard his hands hurt. Tears running down a 15-year-old's face that he was, for once, too overwhelmed to hide. Because the man who had taught him to put his feet in the floor was standing in the center of the world with a 50-year-old belt in his hands. And in that moment, 100 small things rearranged themselves in the boy's mind at once. Every murmured correction across an empty mat. Every feet first. The hand is always last. Every night the janitor had appeared out of the dark with a principle in his mouth and left again before Deshaun could thank him. Deshaun had thought, all this time, that he was being pitied by a kind old man with a mop. He understood now that he had been chosen, that of every soul in that gleaming building, Every member's son, every trophy winner, every child whose parents had paid a fortune for the best. A grandmaster had looked around and picked him, the scholarship kid in the too big G, the one nobody would spar, to receive the thing that could not be bought, the boy who had been told, in 100 quiet ways, that he did not belong in that room, was the only student in it who had been taught by a master. He clapped until his palms went numb, and he did not wipe his face, because there was nothing shameful in what was on it. And then the whole room came up, 200 people in evening dress, rising, applauding, the sound rolling and building until it filled the gleaming temple to the rafters. And the only two people not on their feet were Preston Vaughn, standing rigid and gray by his dais, and Roland Kessler, staring at his weeping son on the mat. Hanshi Toyama raised one hand, and the room fell quiet. "I have made my decision," he said, "about certification." He turned to Preston Vaughn. "This school," Hanshi Toyama said, "will not be certified by the Seiryu Kai." He said it without heat. He said it the way you state a fact. A house is not its floors. The old man went on. It is not its trophy, or its cameras, or the money that built its walls. A house of the art is its people, and the truest measure of a house is not how it treats the man at the top, but how it treats the man at the bottom, the man it believes can do nothing for it. He looked at Preston. "In this house, you had a master of the art cleaning your toilets, and you did not see him, not because you could not, because you had trained yourself not to look, and you built a place where a boy could learn from watching you that a man in coveralls is garbage. That is what I came to certify. I will not put the name of my teachers on it." He turned and walked to Eli, and the two old men left the mat together, out through the plain door to the service corridor, and the cameras did not follow, because Sloane Carrington, standing at the back with her headset around her neck, had already taken it off. She was not thinking about a competition reality series anymore. She was thinking about the footage she already had. What happened over the next 90 days happened fast. The way things happen when a truth that has been held down for years finally gets to stand up within 72 hours. The footage was everywhere. Meridian did not make Champions Academy. Sloane Carrington, to her credit, did something better. She released, with Eli's permission and none of the fanfare Preston had dreamed of, a 12-minute short film of the ceremony. It was titled The Grandmaster and the Janitor. It was viewed 40 million times in the first week, but the clip that truly took the country by the throat was the one Trevor Kessler himself had posted 6 weeks earlier. You know your place. Some people got it, and some people clean up after the people who got it. Now playing side by side with the footage of that same old man laying Trevor gently on the mat and offering him his hand. The internet does not always get things right. It got this right. Within 10 days, the Meridian streaming deal was dead. Formally and finally, no production company on earth wanted to build a brand around the Vaughn Institute now. But something larger had been set loose, and it did not stay in the martial arts world. The image of it, a grandmaster walking past a rich man's outstretched hand to bow to the janitor at the back of the room, traveled far beyond the people who knew a kata from a trophy. It landed on every person who had ever been the one in the coveralls, the one at the service entrance, the one spoken to as though they were furniture. Custodians shared it. Home health aides shared it. Line cooks and hotel housekeepers and the men who empty the trash in gleaming buildings at 4 a.m. shared it, because they had all, at one time or another, I've been looked straight through. The story stopped being about one dojo. It became about a question every viewer had to sit with on their own. How many rooms have I walked through where the most important person in it was the one I never once looked at? Within 2 weeks, the instructors who had lined that wall in silence for years began, Onebewan, to talk. It started with a 27-year-old assistant instructor named Ryan Kowalski, who had laughed at a couple of Preston's jokes over the years and had spent the ceremony feeling sick about it. Ryan wrote a long, unsparing public account of what it had actually been like to work at the Institute, the presentation standards, the basement, the way Preston spoke to the staff when the members weren't around, the video Trevor had made and Preston had laughed at. Others followed. And here is the thing about a silence like that. It does not break because one brave person shouts. It breaks because one person finally says the thing out loud. And then everyone who had been holding the same shame in the same dark discovers, all at once, that they were never alone in seeing it. They were only alone in staying quiet. The stories that came out were not about a single bad night. They were about years. The gleam, it turned out, had been hiding a great deal. Within 30 days, the Seryukai did something that reverberated far beyond one school. It did not merely deny the Vaughn Institute. It reviewed Trevor Kessler's competitive record, found that his rank had never been legitimately conferred by any recognized federation, that it was, like everything else in that building, purchased and self-declared, and it issued a public advisory. Trevor Kessler held no standing in the lineage, and no Seryukai-affiliated tournament would recognize his rank or admit him to sanctioned competition. The other major federations, watching the whole thing unfold in 40 million views, quietly followed Trevor Kessler's competitive career. The thing his father had spent a fortune building simply ceased to exist. Within 60 days, Roland Kessler withdrew his funding. The brushed gold sign over the arch, the Kessler Champions Wing, came down. Roland told a business reporter, off the record, that he was reassessing the family's philanthropic priorities, which is what a man says when he has watched his son weep on a mat in front of 200 people and has finally, 40 years too late, begun to wonder what he taught him. Within 4 months, the Vaughn Institute of Martial Excellence closed its doors. Membership had collapsed. The limestone building in the Gold Coast went dark, then went up for lease. Preston Vaughn gave one interview to a martial arts podcast in which he attempted to explain that it had all been a misunderstanding, that he had always respected his staff, that the culture of the Institute had been misrepresented. No one believed him. He did not open another school. The 7 gold bars on his belt, it turned out, had never meant anything at all. And now everyone knew it. Trevor Kessler dropped out of public view. But there is a coda to Trevor. And it matters. Because black stories are not only about the fall of the arrogant. 8 months after the ceremony, a letter arrived at the front desk of a small dojo in Bronzeville. It was from Trevor. It was 3 pages long, in a young man's cramped hand, and it did not ask for anything. It said, "Innocence, I have watched the video of what I did 100 times. I have watched what you did in return more than that. I do not understand why you offered me your hand. I am trying to become the kind of person who would understand it. I am sorry." Eli read it once. He did not reply in words, but he kept the letter. And later, much later, when a reporter asked him about Trevor Kessler, Eli said only this: the boy was never the disease. The boy was the symptom. Somebody taught him he was better than a man with a mop. And everybody around him agreed. And that agreement is the sickness. I don't hate a symptom. I try to cure the disease. And the cure is a room where nobody is invisible. Elias Broadus was. For about 3 weeks, the most famous martial artist in America, The offers came like weather. 3 networks wanted a show. A supplement company wanted his face on a bottle. A speaking agency offered a fortune for a lecture tour. 2 publishers wanted the book, The Janitor, Grandmaster, the fairy tale arc, the whole thing. A famous mixed martial arts gym in Las Vegas offered him a head instructor position and a salary with more zeros than Eli had earned in his entire life combined. He said no. To all of it. Every single one. He said no. The way he did everything. Quietly. Without drama. Without explanation to people who would not have understood the explanation. He did not want to be a brand. He had spent 6 years cleaning the floors of a temple built by a man who wanted to be a brand. And he had watched what it did to the art and to the people. And Elias Broadus had not carried Kaito Ahara's belt across an ocean and held it in a wooden box for 6 years in order to sell his master's promise on a supplement bottle. He accepted exactly one thing, Hanshi Toyama. Before he flew back to Okinawa, sat with Eli in the basement of Greater Canaan Missionary Baptist Church. On the mat, Eli had hauled down the stairs himself and watched Eli teach his free class. 15 kids from the neighborhood. Some, the age Andre had been, moving through their kata under the low ceiling. Toyama watched for a long time, and when the class was over and the children had gone home, the old man said, "This is the school I came to certify. I just came to the wrong address." The Seryukai certified the basement. It became the first Seryukai-affiliated dojo in the city. A free program. In a church basement in Bronzeville. Run by a rokudan who cleaned floors for a living. Toyama endowed it through the Federation. Ryan Kowalski, the assistant instructor who had broken the silence, asked if he could come teach there for free on the weekends. Eli said yes. And Ryan drove 11 miles south every Saturday for years. And found, in a church basement, the art he thought he had joined the Vaughn Institute to learn. Miss Odessa Grant, who had lost her job when the institute closed, and who did not miss it, became the program's administrator, and later the founding chair of its board. And she ran that basement dojo with the same fillet knife efficiency. She had run a rich man's front desk. Except now it meant something. They named it the Andre Broadus Community Dojo. Eli did not explain to the children whose name was on the door. But there was a photograph on the wall, next to the one of a man in white squinting into the Okinawa sun. A photograph of a laughing 19-year-old, forever 19. And the children learned, the way children learn things, that everything in that room was built in the shape of a grief that had been turned, through 40 years of patient work, into something that could catch other boys before the corner did. And the Seiyukai did one more thing. And this is the thing that reached furthest. Because black stories are never only about one man's vindication. They are about changing the house. So the next man is not made invisible. Hanshi Toyama, in the last act of his life's work, put forward a new standard for the entire Federation worldwide. And the Federation adopted it. And it is now simply called the Broadus Standard. Though Eli asked them not to use his name, and they overruled him. It reads, "No student of this federation may be promoted to the rank of black belt without a documented record of teaching the art, without charge, to those who cannot afford to pay for it. The art is not property. It is a debt. It is paid forward, or it is not held at all. Every black belt certified by the lineage now, anywhere in the world, has taught someone for free. Because a boy threw an old man's belt in the trash in Chicago, and the man who owned the belt understood something the boy never had, and the whole house was rebuilt around it. There is one more scene, and it is the only one that Eli would have called important. A year after the ceremony, on an ordinary Thursday night in the basement of Greater Canaan Missionary Baptist Church. The class had ended, and the children had gone home. And Elias Broadus stood alone on the mat he had hauled down the stairs 11 years before. Deshaun Ellis was 17 now, almost 18. He had followed Eli south when the institute closed. He had spent a year training in that basement, 4 nights a week. No longer the outsider in the too big G. No longer the boy nobody would spar. But the senior student of the only school that had ever actually seen him. He was helping Eli stack the mats. And Eli told him to wait a moment. Eli went to the wooden box he now kept on a shelf beside his brother's photograph. He opened it. He lifted out the belt. Kaito Uehara's belt. 50 years of a great master's hands. A promise carried across an ocean. Held in a box for 6 years. Brushed clean of coffee grounds in a service corridor. Offered to a grandmaster and taken back. And never, ever worn. And he carried it to Deshaun with both hands. You know what this is. Eli said. It was not a question. Deshaun nodded slowly. His throat had gone tight. I'm not giving it to you. Eli said. Not yet. You're not ready. And you know you're not. And the day you think you are is the day you're furthest from it. A small, rare smile. That's the whole thing. Right there. That's what Uehara Sensei meant. Now you truly begin. He held the boy's eyes. But I want you to hold it. So you know what you're working toward. So you understand that this, he lifted the frayed gray-white belt gently, is where you're going. Not a trophy, not a video, not a rich man's floor. This, the promise. And one day, when you've earned it, and when you've found the one who needs it after you, you'll do exactly what I'm doing right now. You'll hold it out, and you'll say the words. He placed the belt in Deshaun Ellis's 2 hands. The boy held it the way Eli had taught him to hold everything that mattered, with both hands, from the ground up, and he could not speak. And he did not need to. Eli looked past him, at the photograph of the man in white on the beach in Okinawa, and he spoke to it quietly, the way he had spoken to the empty mat 1,000 nights, the way he had spoken to it on the night a boy threw the belt in the trash, and on the night the Grandmaster bowed, and on the night the temple went dark. You said carry both. Eli said to the photograph, so I carried both. I carried yours. And I carried mine. And now there's a third. He looked back at the boy holding the belt. It doesn't end. You always said it doesn't end. The belt isn't finished. The belt is never finished. He turned off the basement light. From the street outside, through the small window at sidewalk level, the light of a church basement in Bronzeville glowed for one more beat against the dark. A poor room, an honest room, the realest house of the art in the whole city. Then, the night closed over it. And tomorrow, the door would open again. There are 3 things to carry out of a story like this one. First, what the powerful throw away is almost always the thing they were never taught to recognize. A belt is a strip of cloth. A pot of soup is a pot of soup. A man in coveralls is a man in coveralls. What gives any of them weight is not the surface a rich man can see. It is the lineage the thing carries, the hands that made it, the promise folded into it. Trevor Kessler looked at the single most valuable object in that entire gleaming building and saw a rag, because no one had ever taught him how to look. That was not only his failure, it was the failure of everyone who built the room around him. Second, and this is the part I want you to sit with, some inheritances cannot be written down. You cannot put what Kaito Uehara gave Elias Broadus into a book. You cannot photograph it, or stream it, or sell it on a bottle. It lived in the man's hands, in the 6 inches of a turn from the hip, in the stillness he kept, while a boy called him garbage, in the choice to offer his hand to the one who had thrown his master's belt in the trash. That kind of inheritance does not survive because someone archived it. It survives one way, and one way only, because someone passed it on, body to body, night after night, to the one who needed it. The most important things you carry from the people who loved you are like this. They are not in the will. They are in the way you were taught to stand. Third, the most dangerous thing about an arrogant man is his certainty that strength is whatever looks strong on camera. Preston Vaughn had the trophies, the titles, the gold bars, the $1,100 GI, the cameras, the whole gleaming performance of mastery, and none of it was real. And the moment a real master walked in the door, all of it turned to plaster in an evening. Meanwhile, the actual strength in that building had spent 6 years on its knees, mopping the floor, asking for nothing. And it was strong precisely because it did not need anyone to see it. Real power is quiet. It does not perform. It waits. And when it finally moves, it moves once. And it moves gently, and it offers you its hand. If you watched a story like this and something in your chest went tight, that is the part of you that recognizes a real one when he walks into a room. That is the part of you that knows the strongest man you ever met was probably the quietest, that he carried something heavy without ever making you carry it, that he was passing you something you didn't even know you were being given. Talent does not vanish when the world refuses to see it. Neither does dignity. Neither does a promise. It waits. It kneels down and mops the floor, and waits. And one day the door opens, and the right person walks in. And everything the world threw in the trash stands up in the center of the room and cannot be unseen again. So here is my question for you tonight, and I want you to answer it in the comments. Because I read them, and because someone else needs to read yours. Who is the quiet one in your life? The person everyone underestimated. The one who carried something they never made a show of. And what did they pass on to you that you didn't understand until later? Tell me their name. Say what they gave you. Because the ones who pass it on deserve to be remembered by the ones who kept it. If this story moved you, share it tonight with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's been made to feel invisible. Someone who's been told that what they carry is worth nothing. Hit the like button so the channel can reach the next person who needs it. And subscribe, because the next story is being told by a man in gray coveralls whose name nobody in the building knows yet. And by the time we're done, they'll never forget it. The belt is not finished. The belt is never finished.